about that chirp life, yeah, without a doubt. West Coast water boys drill can't be left out. The trilogy, the three from me, they be dabbing right, yeah, you know why. I'm straight about it, bout tough guys can take a hit, yeah, but not from these. Tougher than UFC, they be tapping out.
Welcome to another episode of the Rodney Hash podcast. Today I'm joined by Anthony Minnitti. I'm going to kind of let him introduce himself a little bit. I greatly appreciate your time coming to talk with us about rescheduling from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, what all that means, what all that entails. So I'm just going to kind of let you introduce your long list of reasons why we should all be listening to what you have to say in this industry.
Thanks, Ronnie. It's great for thank you for the opportunity to be on the podcast today. And this is such an important issue, and it's really confusing because a lot of what's going on seems common sense would dictate certain approaches, and there's nothing common sense about what's going on with the recent rescheduling. So somebody who's been in both the pharma industry and cannabis and also politics for decades of my life, I have a pretty unique perspective on all the different dynamics, how they intersect, and why it is we need to understand exactly what's happening and what these terms mean. Yeah, it's important stuff, and I've been trying to mostly educate. I do, of course, have my own position and opinion about where I think we should go, but I think that before people begin to full-throatedly advocate or celebrate moves in certain directions, everybody really needs to understand exactly what each different option is, and if at the end of it they still believe in their position and they think that's the right way to go, great. But what we definitely wouldn't want to see is, after so many years of building an industry, for people to advocate a position mistakenly, only to say afterwards, if only I knew, or why wouldn't someone have told me? So that's mostly what I've done. There's people that agree with me. There's people that disagree with me. I've had all sorts of opinions expressed about me over time, and after being retired from politics for a few years, where I found the only area that I'm more deficient in than looks is intelligence, I could say it's good to be back on social media and dealing with the incoming fire again, because I kind of forgot what it was like after 5 or 6 years of not having to deal with it. So
yeah, it's weird. LinkedIn has slowly started to become the new Facebook. It seems like everyone bickering within the industry. It's really weird. You got the hemp guys versus the cannabis guys, and now you've got it seems like rescheduling is that issue that everyone's super confused on. Like you said, I feel like there's a lot of support for it, that people just don't fully understand what all is entailed in this. I feel like there's a lot of people advocating that this is a good thing without realizing that this may end up meaning them potentially losing their license or worse. So
much worse. So just to give everybody an idea of a little bit about myself, I started working in pharmacy in 1984 when I was 14 years old in my grandfather's pharmacy, Dog and Arrow's Pharmacy in Camden, New Jersey. For those who may not be aware of Camden, we're a small city right outside of Philadelphia. We're across the Delaware River. I would liken Camden, for those who don't know, it seems, for Ohio, you're probably in the Midwest. We're a lot like Detroit, Michigan, maybe a little bit smaller. We have about 85,000 residents, but a lot of the challenges that you see in Detroit that you hear so much about are a lot of what we deal with in the city of Camden also. So we're basically the East Coast version, if I had to describe where we are. I've spent my entire career working in pharmacy as an independent pharmacist and an independent pharmacy owner in the city of Camden. I've seen a lot of things from the time I've started in '84 through the time I graduated in 1993 from Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science, to owning my own, being an owner in our company since 1997, when we purchased Bell Pharmacy, which is where we are now. I've been an elected official for over 17 years in my hometown of Cinnaminson, New Jersey. I served 4 one-year terms as mayor. and was involved in politics and the political process for over 20 years, even when I wasn't an elected official. So I've got a good idea of how it all works, a lot of the political speak, and a good idea of what exactly the sausage making is like behind the scenes. And I most recently became involved in the cannabis industry as I was segueing out of my political career after retiring in 2018. And it stemmed from something that was pretty unique of an experience that I had in 1997 when I purchased Bell Pharmacy. And that was, I found the old owners never threw anything away. And the pharmacy's we're in our 94th year now of nonstop being in business. And the old owners never threw anything out, which was a bit of a problem, but it was also really cool because I got to witness almost 100 years of pharmacy that had all been thrown in closets and stacked in basements and in boxes that nobody ever cleaned up. And one of those unusual finds was a bottle that said tincture of cannabis on it in a regular prescription label from the pharmacy. And I remember looking at this and saying, wow, that's pretty crazy. And I did some research into it, and the pharmacy was actually dispensing cannabis prior to its prohibition in 1937. So from 1931, when it opened, through 1937, when the federal prohibitions began to kick in, Bell Pharmacy, was then Bell Drug Company, was dispensing cannabis. And then, of course, for all those years, it wasn't. And when New Jersey first started to talk about a move towards medical marijuana in about 2013 under then Governor Christie, I recalled that bottle and I was like, well, I wonder if I still have that. Looked around, I found it. I did still have it. And I thought about, wow, wouldn't it be great to bring medical cannabis back to the same location where it was last dispensed prior to prohibition? And I've since found out through our research that we are actually the only facility in the nation that has dispensed cannabis both before prohibition and after. So while we talk about
that is pretty cool
of bars that made it through prohibition, or certain alcohol companies or microbrewers or local distilleries, we're the only remaining facility in the nation that was actually dispensing cannabis then and has brought it back to the same facility now. So that's also a real piece of our industry history that I felt that it was important to preserve and to highlight that this actually does exist. That's how long our industry has really existed, even though it was underground for a very long time. So when I got involved in the cannabis industry, it was to ironically dispense it through the pharmacy. I really didn't have any interest in recreational. I was from pharma. Pharmacy is what I knew, and to me, the applications of cannabis as from the medical perspective were fascinating. I always believed that, as my grandfather, who started practice in 1933, that botanicals back then is how all medications were made. He actually predated most of the pre-made tablets and things that we take for granted now. There was no insulin, there was no antibiotics. All these things didn't exist back when he started. And the majority of pharmacy was the compounding of therapies from raw ingredients, powdered substances. In many cases, botanicals were that ingredient. Powdered opium, believe it or not. Cannabis was one. So I saw, wow, we're coming back around to it.
Nowadays, it's more synthetics trying to patent those botanicals that they take and change molecularly by like 1 or 2 molecules and then patent them as their own, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. And in some ways, that's what they did. Big Pharma has done that with cannabis and a product called Marinol that was somewhere in the mid to late 90s. That was ironically a Schedule IV drug that was prescription only. And it was a derivative, a tweaking of the THC molecule, by a couple positions here or there, and they repackaged in an oral gel cap. Didn't work real well. Commercially, it was a failure because people expected it to have the same sort of effect as the inhaled product, or the product that was be delivered directly into the bloodstream, either by, there weren't really vapes back then, but by a typically just smoking. So it didn't work. It was commercially a flop, and that was the last anybody heard of it. But I thought, how great is it we could actually bring the real product back through pharmacy? So my first contention back then to the regulators was, okay, well, New Jersey, you've declared it a drug. It's available pursuant to a doctor's written order. I don't need anybody's permission to carry it. That's what a pharmacy does. So ship it. Nobody knew how to answer that question at the time because they're like, well, wait. And I said, well, you had Marinol. That was, THC. That was cannabis. We've already carried that. We have a DEA license. I'm like, I don't need a cannabis regulatory commission to tell me I can have it. I don't have to get permission from the Board of Pharmacy. I don't have to get permission every time I bring a new drug into the pharmacy. So why wouldn't cannabis be treated the same? Well, obviously, pharma and canna, neither of them could have that. So that was the end of that experiment. And I was sort of suddenly this man without a country. It's neither industry liked anything that I had to say. So we went forward over a period of years. And of course, New Jersey went to adult use and we obtained an adult use license. And we were able to open a full recreational dispensary under the same roof as the pharmacy. And the way that we were able to do that is when the original owners had purchased Bell Pharmacy, they had also purchased adjoining properties. So it was the big corner property on the corner of Haddon and Kane Avenue, and they purchased 2 row homes that were adjoining the pharmacy at the time. So they erased the first lot line between 1201 and 1203, and it became all 1201. But they didn't erase the second lot line, which was 1205. So we had this really interesting.
So technically, it was 2 separate addresses still.
Correct. So you walk right through as if it's all one, but legally you're crossing over to a different address. So by installing a simple glass entry door and putting an address on it, we were able to bring it back to right under the same roof. And we have a pharmacy department and we have a cannabis dispensary right side by side. And when some ask how you do that, pharmacies always have been typically co-located with other uses. In the 40s or 50s, you would have a pharmacy department and there'd be cards and soda fountains and ice cream and all of that. When we go to more recent times, Walgreens, of course, had a pharmacy department and a liquor department all under one roof. So all we did was copy that exact same model, except we applied it to cannabis. And we actually are the only model of its kind in the country. Nobody's attempted to do this because of the regulatory hurdles and the intermixing of the pharmacy side and the cannabis side. But we were able to actually execute that and demonstrate how it could be done, where you could have pharma and canna together in the same facility, and it's been operating wonderfully. And one of the reasons
the whole medical building itself,
right? When what it's done is, ironically, I'm glad that we didn't get the medical license, because the recreational license, it's adult use. There's no regulation on it outside of the recreational regs. The medical use license had us limited to product. There was all sorts of constraints that were built into the medical, or what they call in Jersey, the ATC, or Alternative Treatment Center model.
Now,
exist.
Who was in charge of that? Because I know here in Ohio, we originally were under the Board of Pharmacy itself for our medical program, which, if anyone who's listening is outside of Ohio and doesn't, or just started in the program, it was a headache. It was so frustrating. I could sit here and go on and on for days about why it was such a headache. But I'll just leave it at that. It was absolutely a nightmare. Everyone is super relieved that we just turned over to the Department of Commerce. So I feel like if we went back to the Board of Pharmacy completely regulating everything, it would also automatically be just a step in the wrong direction, because we've already made that mistake.
Right. There's case law now that says the Board of Pharmacy is prohibited, because of the Schedule I classification, from having any say in cannabis. So that's something that's developed recently. That's probably why Ohio has moved it from the Board of Pharmacy, which seems like it would be the right place for it, right? But not.
If they knew what it was really about, if they really took the time to actually educate themselves and ask questions about what terpenes are and what minor cannabinoids are, what is the endocannabinoid system, how does it work? But unfortunately, in Ohio, being a fly on the wall working in the industry, I've definitely heard them talk pretty much like they were part of reefer madness. Like, wait, you mean to tell me this is just a plant? It just grows and you cut it down and dry it. It's ready? What? It's like, yeah, I mean, you could post process it too, but like you don't need to.
Yep.
It blew them away.
Pharmacists aren't trained that way, and the industry doesn't. I would say the industry as a whole, the pharma profession, does not embrace this cannabis thing. They don't. So,
I
you're going to
wouldn't say all of them though, because there's definitely some pharmacists like yourself, and I've met a bunch of them within the industry that are like managers of dispensaries that really do care about the product. I've recommended a couple books to numerous of them, and I know that they've gotten it. So there are people that do care that are pharmacists. It's not all of them, but it's very much so the very small minority, it seems like.
correct, and that's why I say the profession writ large doesn't embrace this because a lot of them are they're academians. They don't, they buy into the reefer madness thing. A lot of them have a lot of experience in substance abuse, and of course they still hold on to this outdated concept that cannabis is somehow a gateway drug to all this other problem. So there's so many conflicting, when you take all the different, I'm anti-cannabis for this reason, they're all different reasons, but they're all anti-cannabis in the end. And that makes up the majority of what the industry is. People like myself and like some of the pharmacists who are more classically trained and understand that really this is the roots of our profession, is where you're going back to here. That's not the way the younger generations have been trained. They're trained by Big Pharma. So everything is from a bottle. Everything is from a company that's made, and you act almost as a doctor more so than you do as, I don't want to say an herbalist because that might not be the right thing, but not as somebody who actually compounds or creates remedies or therapies or treatments. Everything is very much scientific, analytical. There's no art. Pharmacy, believe it or not, and medicine in general is not a science. It's an art. However, as time has gone by, and my stepdaughters are recent graduates of a pharmacy school, it's not viewed as an art anymore. It's a science. This is it. There's not a lot of deviation. And, that's it. They refer to literature and that's what they go by. And, the FDA, the DEA, and that's one of the reasons, believe it or not, why I never want to see cannabis rescheduled. And I'll kind of use that as our jumping off point for it, because for something to be rescheduled, and most lay people won't understand this, and nobody in the cannabis industry probably will. For something to be rescheduled, it becomes a prescription-only product. And nobody understands that there is a huge difference between Schedule 1 and Schedule 3. So we start off with, what does that mean? Well, the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, which I'm all sure everybody's somewhat familiar of, determined that to sort of curb the abuse of drugs, the federal government, I guess probably under the Nixon administration back then, had to come up with a solution, as government always does, where they were classifying all these substances based on medical use and abuse potential. So Schedule 1 means there's no medical use. There's a highest potential for abuse and addiction. And then, of course,
which is currently where cannabis has been labeled for the last 50, right, 60 years, something like that plus. Right. And some other drugs in that would be like acid. Can you just go ahead and give me like a list of, I already know that you know them off the top of your head. I don't like it.
Peyote, psilocybin, lysergic acid, LSD, cannabis, those all exist in the high addiction potential, like PCP. like those sorts of drugs, those all exist in, and methamphetamine, in fact, that's another one. Those all exist in sort of the Schedule 1, no medical use, high addiction potential. And then,
Just something that's out there. Cocaine is not in there, correct?
correct. And that's what a lot of people believe, that cocaine is a Schedule 1. It is not. Cocaine is a Schedule 2. And what many don't understand about that, it is available by prescription. It's commonly used in hospitals for anesthetic treatments and things like that. There are very legitimate uses for cocaine, and it is something that you can order right from your wholesaler if you're an independent pharmacy pursuant to a prescription. But our Schedule 2 drugs are where most of the oxycodone products, the opiates, exist these days. If we move to Schedule 3, that's where you have Suboxone, anabolic steroids, ketamine, Tylenol with codeine, tramadol. Tramadol's not 3 yet. If we go to Schedule 4, that's your benzodiazepines, Valium, Xanax, Halcyon. That's where tramadol exists. That's where gabapentin seems to be moving toward for treatment of pain. Another Schedule 2 would be Adderall and Ritalin, your attention deficit disorder medications that are based off of amphetamine salts. Those are Schedule 2. So you're getting an idea of where these. Hold on one second. I'm getting a low power.
So I'm going to take this opportunity to thank every single one of you for watching up to this point. We will continue in just a second, but I just wanted to take a brief moment to say, if you guys are enjoying the content and want to see more of it, please leave a like, subscribe, comment down below what you like about it, what you don't like about it, what would you improve on. This is all totally, I'm not making any profit on any of this. This is totally because I want you guys to have this material. I want you guys to have this content. And I just want to know you guys are enjoying it. So again, if you guys could just do me a big favor, hit that like, subscribe, noti bell, all that good stuff. Thank you.
So we are back. Sorry about that.
Good. So we're moving towards Schedule 3 for cannabis is what they're saying, which is they're saying just a little bit less than cocaine, but still more than a lot of these other things that I don't necessarily agree with, that they have higher abuse potential, especially when places like Alcoholics Anonymous in Canada quite a few years ago had actually said that they agree in using cannabis and CBD, especially for trying to get off of opioid addiction and alcoholism and things like that. And you, as someone who's been a pharmacist through the time of the opioid pandemic, can probably attest to seeing that the usage starts to go down as the access for cannabis and things like it go up.
Yeah, can you just give me 1 second here to fix this phone? I am having trouble getting it to stand up.
Actually, here, I'll just go ahead and 3, 2, 1. All right, sorry about that, guys. We actually had a little bit of a technical difficulty there, so we're gonna jump back in with talking about. We just finished describing the Schedule 1, 2, and 3, what kind of drugs are also included in it, and how everything is then basically dependent on a prescription. We were also kind of talking a little bit about what all was involved in the Controlled Substances Act, what each one means. So with that being said, currently,
it might be a good idea. Let me kind of, sort of close out about what the Controlled Substances Act, what it is. So now the Controlled Substances Act, we have to remember from the political point of view, this is a law. It went through the political process of going through Congress, being signed by, the executive, which is the president, and it has the full force of law. And this is important to know because a lot of individuals talk about rules. And what's the difference between a rule? A rule is where a bureaucracy has the ability to make certain changes within the law that have the force of law. But you can't change the essence of the law. And that's something that people aren't fully grasping when they talk about cannabis and rulemaking and what the DEA or the FDA or the HHS, and it's all over the place with the current administration, who is exactly making this 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 quote rule. The DEA can recommend by rule changes within those classes. So they may be able to say, okay, well, we can move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. That they can absolutely do. But you have to understand that they move it from 1 to 3. It is now subject to all the regulations that govern a Schedule 3 substance. And this is the lie in the ointment. This is the fatal flaw in the whole construct of this, is the idea of what happens when it moves from 1 to 3. Everybody's like, well, that's a great thing. It's less controlled, it's less restricted. That's not true. Right now, with Schedule 1, there's one regulation. It's prohibited federally. That's it.
Yes.
Okay. There's no medical use. So that's
So with
it.
that being said, there is no legal operators within the industry in any other one of those drugs in Schedule 1 that operate in any shape and or form. So it's literally just cannabis is kind of that outlier that just gets a little bit of like a, okay, we're going to technically let you, but we're just taking a hands-off approach because previously we had the Cole Memorandum under the Obama administration, which was then revoked and pulled back underneath the Trump administration by Jeff Sessions, the guy who, quote, good people who don't smoke marijuana. So now this is the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, that the federal government in any way, shape, or form has decided they want to step back into cannabis law since the Obama administration.
Correct. Where we are now is, with the Cole rule, basically it was they weren't going to fund future expansion of enforcement at the federal level into the state level. And what I can say is, regardless of where that funding mechanism wound up eventually, all the administrations have followed basically the Obama administration in saying, okay, we're staying out of it at the state level. As long as you're not involved in it, as long as it's not crossing state lines, as long as the money isn't entering the federal system, you're good. We're not going to say anything. Now, wait, that doesn't mean they can't. That just means they're choosing to not. And they've chosen to not because so much has happened with it at the state level that really it's impossible. It's too unwieldy to even attempt to go in there. So it's just like, okay, well, federally, we're not going to do anything about it. We're not going to, like for a pharmacist, for instance, we have federal licensure. We have DEA license. We've got license through Centers for Medicaid Services, or CMS. Medicare. There's all sorts of federal licensing that pharmacies have. If they were to transact in cannabis, they would be in violation and could lose their pharmacy licenses for doing that. So, and that's still very much a very real threat. And that's why pharmacies don't carry cannabis, because the DEA, if you do it, they're like, wait a minute, let's remind you that you're a pharmacy, you have a DEA license, you can't transact a Schedule 1 substance. So if you're licensed by the federal government, you are restricted. So that's something that people don't really understand, that dynamic right now. But the federal government does exert some authority in that. And the Georgia pharmacists recently found this out because in their state, they had a referendum that allowed pharmacies to dispense certain quantities and certain strengths of cannabis products through a pharmacy. Their board of pharmacy approved it. They started, and within a week, they all got love letters from the DEA reminding them that you're in violation of the requirements of your DEA license. And if we find out that you're transacting cannabis across the pharmacy counter, you're at risk for revocation of your DEA license, which means as a pharmacy, you would not be able to dispense any controlled substances at all anymore. And that, of course, would trigger a federal review, and eventually their Medicare license, that will be revoked. Any federal licenses would just get revoked, and basically the pharmacy would be out of business. So any entity that is like pharmacy in that regard, that did try to join the industry and had federal licensure, that still is very much enforced. So, but broadly, if you're outside of the federal licensing process, you can transact in cannabis, and that's what's good about it. If it goes,
which is why you're able to operate, but having to be in two separate entities.
Correct.
You couldn't do it under the same license currently because of the Schedule 1 thing.
Right. We have a pharmacy license. We have a cannabis license. They're separate. They're distinct. We have a company that owns the pharmacy license. We have a company that owns a cannabis license. Though they're the same ownership, they're separate. So they're not doing this at any point. Once this happens, the federal government will come down, Schedule 1 or Schedule, and they will shut you down. And this is important because when we talk about what happens when it's Schedule 3, well, everybody is curious. Well, we don't know what's going to happen. You know exactly what's going to happen because right there, if it's Schedule 3, if cannabis is a Schedule 3 substance and Schedule 3 substances are governed by these DEA regulations, then cannabis is subject to these regulations. What are the Schedule 3 regulations? Well, there's a book. I've placed the link, the DEA manual that all registrants receive. You don't need right now, you don't need a DEA license to dispense a Schedule 1 cannabis because the DEA won't give you it. You can't get a license to do that because it's prohibited. If it joins the 2 through 5 categories, all right, now you do have to have a license. So first and foremost, anybody that wants to engage in commerce in a controlled substance, per the Controlled Substances Act, you must apply for a DEA license. And the reason I use the term apply is because that's what you do. You don't fill out a form and get a DEA license back. You apply to be permitted to have a DEA license. But what could stop you from getting a DEA license? Do you have a drug conviction? You're automatically out. You won't get a DEA license.
Means a majority of the industry is then out as a whole.
Right.
Just off the first thing. Go ahead.
If you have a cannabis conviction, you will not receive a DEA license. You're excluded. Why? That's their regulations. If you have a DUI, you will not receive a DEA license. If you have any sort of felony conviction, you will not receive a DEA license. You have to provide your fingerprints. You have to go through an FBI background check to have a DEA license. Once you pass all those and you obtain this DEA license, great, you can transact in the commerce of controlled substances in conformance with the Controlled Substances Act. But you also have to renew this.
Just real quick, how long do you think, so let's say day one you apply. From that point, even if you are likely to get that, how long do you think that window would take?
6 months.
6
months if they're not busy. 6
but
months.
I'd imagine they're probably going to explode in applications. So that would probably make that a little bit long.
Looking at a lot longer. And until then, you can't touch it. Can't touch a controlled substance. And every actor in our industry, Verano, Cureleaf, Truly, everybody's got to get that DEA license. Anybody that touches cannabis, all the companies have to register. They will receive a DEA license. The only way that they can distribute product and not risk violating and revocation of that DEA license is if the person they're transacting with has a DEA license that's valid and provides that. You don't have that DEA license, they're not going to send you the product, because if they do, they violated federal law flat out, and they face revocation of that license, and they will get caught. We talk about criminalization. One of the requirements of Schedule 3 substances is they're available by prescription only. So there is no more.
Currently, this is one of those things that I feel like a lot of patients don't understand, is no one in America has a prescription for cannabis.
No.
If a doctor was to prescribe you cannabis, they would lose their license to be a medical doctor. everything is currently going under what we call a recommendation. So all the
Correct.
recommendation medical cards that are out there would essentially be invalid. They're not prescriptions, they're recommendations.
Right. Those are not prescriptions. Those are regulatory requirements that are enacted by states and have no standing with the federal government. And, for those who think that, okay, well, the state can just ignore it. No, you can't. There's a difference between ignoring the Schedule 1 thing and the Schedule 3. And here are the reasons why. First of all, a Schedule 3 substance is highly regulated. See, a Schedule 1 substance is prohibited. Schedule 3 is regulated, highly regulated. So that's the difference. You're going from an area where the government has nothing to do with it because no matter what, you're not supposed to have it. Now you're going to, it's officially recognized by the government. It's subject to all those regulations. There's no way around that. And if you read the DEA rules that they basically put out, this draft proposal,
which I will have a link for that in the description below, as well as a link to, we are currently in the comment period for them to kind of hear us out. So if any of this is chiming with any of you guys, make sure that you comment on there. Let them know how you feel.
I'll tell you how to comment. I'm going to tell you, I will share at the end how to comment in a way that's going to matter, because certain comments are not going to matter to them. Other comments. So we want to make sure that our comments are in the right direction. And, I'm just doing now since we're talking about commenting. Inconvenience because you have to get a prescription will not matter. Don't make that point. They don't care. Only having to go to a doctor every 6 months, which you're going to have to do, because to have a controlled substance, you are allowed a 30-day prescription with 5 refills that can only be utilized within 6 months. After that, it's void. You have to get another prescription. And if you're walking around with a cannabis product that wasn't used within that 6 months and you're still possessing it, you're possessing a controlled dangerous substance without a valid prescription. If you're caught, you're going to jail, and it's a felony. There's no questions. There's no waivers of it. There's no non-enforcement. You're going to jail. And that's even if you have a prescription but just didn't use it all and you get caught with possession. It's a felony possession. You will go to prison. So they don't care about those issues per se. Okay. The way that the issues that the DEA may listen to is we have to talk about, well, what happens if cannabis becomes a prescription-only product? There is no medical anymore. There is no recreational anymore. The same rules that govern if I want to go get anabolic steroids, ketamine, or Adderall, or Xanax, or Suboxone, those are going to be the rules if you want to get cannabis. Now, we have no doctors that we know of to prescribe it, right? But it's going to need a prescription. How's that going to work? The one thing that nobody is understanding beyond the rescheduling is the minute it has a, quote, medical use that can be received by prescription only, now it's a drug. Every drug that a doctor writes a prescription for must be approved by the FDA because of the regulations under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So there is no coming in and getting a sativa anymore for sleep. You can only get something an indica for sleep. You're only going to get what the FDA has tested and approved for that use. That's it. That process.
And that's for each specific SKU, correct? So let's say I have 7 SKUs of flour currently and I'm selling them. I just can't get one approval for one SKU and expect it to apply to all 7 across the board. I have to go through and get FDA regulations for each one of the 7. And on top of that, let's say I have 3 of them that are edibles. If one of those ingredients aren't already pre-existingly FDA approved, then that means that I have to go get different approval for that. The whole, like, it makes it an even longer process to get each SKU out there. And there's people out there with 45 SKUs is a fairly decent size for a vertically operated industry. If you're doing edibles and concentrates and tincture and flower, there's people that have 100 plus SKUs.
Yeah, no, I mean, you won't have to worry about that because that will happen at the manufacturer level. They're going to have to do that. So Verano and all these companies, they probably will just sell to a drug company, but they will all have to be, all those products are going to be treated like drugs, and they're going to have to go through the approval process. That could take up to 20 years, and it may not be approved. Keep in mind, a drug approval requires they're going to have specific dosing. They're going to have to talk about and test how each cannabis product in its different concentrations in different forms, how it affects the metabolism of other medications, how it works in pediatrics, how it works in senior citizens, how it works in males, females, all of the things that any other drug has to go through, which takes decades sometimes. Sometimes it takes 20 years to get a drug to market. Every one of the cannabis products, if it's prescribed, will have to go through that process because you've now called it a medication. Once it's deemed a medication, it has to go through that process. Why? It's the law. And if you read the rule carefully that they've published, they say that this rule doesn't waive away the requirements of the FDA.
And that literally is in the draft that they've outlined and proposed, correct?
In the draft rule. They don't say it as bluntly as I'm saying it, but that's exactly what they're saying. They're saying it doesn't change the requirements and the regulations of the Schedule III class. That means prescription only, DEA registrations for everybody involved. There are no more dispensaries, medical or otherwise, because the only entity that is authorized to dispense a drug is a pharmacy. So that's it. It's going to go to you'll have to go to a pharmacy to get it. That's the only place you're going to get it. And you're only going to get it pursuant to a doctor. All these things kick in because that's the law as it exists. And remember back to what I said previously. These rules do not change law. You can make tweaks. Okay, gabapentin, we're going to move it from prescription only to Schedule IV. That you're allowed to do. You can't say, we're going to put gabapentin in a Schedule IV, but don't worry, you don't need a prescription for it. You don't have to have a DEA license to dispense it.
That's the same guidelines every other drug in it has to follow.
So look at it from a common sense standpoint. How many Suboxone dispensaries are there? How many anabolic steroid corner stores are there? They're not. You know why there's not? Because you can't. And once cannabis crosses into that class, it will be subject to all of those regulations. I have heard such junk law and junk science on this, it makes my head spin. But one of the more regular things that I hear now is this idea about, well, it's going to exist in a class where it's illegal, but it's class 3 illegal. I said, look in the manual. Is there a class that says class 3 illegal versus class 3 legal? No, it's Schedule 3. That's it. There is no different treatments. And if you try to treat it differently, if the state were to try to treat it differently, which they may try, okay, you may say, but the state doesn't have the authority to do that in the context of drugs that are approved for medical use as a Schedule 2 through Schedule 5. If that were the case, then why wouldn't states ignore Schedule 2 for cocaine? Because they can't. A state cannot override or lessen a DEA classification because they feel that that's the way it should go. That's not the way it works. Again,
the DEA is super powerful.
Right. The Schedule 1 classification, no medical value, prohibited. That's it. The minute it has medical value, the minute that it becomes mainstream or legit, is the minute that it now is. Think about this. It's called the Controlled Substances Act. What's the first word?
Control. And they're going to try and resume controlling the industry is what it really feels like.
Right. Where do you think the control comes from? The control is the federal government. The control is the FDA. The control is the DEA. They tell you in the act what it is. So anybody who thinks otherwise is either willfully ignorant or just, I don't even know. They just don't want to, they're just dumb. I mean, it tells you what they're going to do. This isn't.
I mean, they've outlined it in their draft pretty specifically, but I feel like because it's 89 pages, a lot of people don't have the time to look at it, or just assume that because the way that the administration is kind of pitching it, it seems like, well, we're going to lessen things. We're going to slowly move in this direction. And it's like, because we're all under the assumption that that would be, well, we're going from 1 to 3. It sounds like it's less. I feel like it's just a lot of people in general are just very much misunderstanding it. There's just a lot of mixed messaging, marketing from political administrations. I feel like in general, this is kind of a political move from the Biden administration in attempts to try and say, hey, like, we're trying to be pro-cannabis. But I don't even think they fully understand what is truly going on here, because it's such a complicated subject that even if they do, it's just weird.
Actually, this isn't weird. I won't get political other than to state fact. When has a Joe Biden or Kamala Harris ever been a friend of this industry?
That's true.
Now, why do you think? Why would they suddenly now, all of a sudden, do? Why would they be any different than they've ever been? I mean, I watch a lot of Dr. Phil. As he always says, the best indicator of future results is past behavior. What makes you think?
Joe past behavior being Joe Biden being the guy who wrote the crime bill, and Kamala Harris, who's responsible for putting more people behind bars from cannabis than anyone as a federal prosecutor.
Right. And why wasn't this a day one thing? Why now, right before political season? It's so obvious what this is. And the problem that we've got as an industry is we're so disorganized in where we want to be with it that so many people are jubilant over this. And I said to them, I'm like, my point to everybody would be, if the federal government announced, we're seizing control of the cannabis industry, we're declaring it a drug, it's going to be handled by big pharma, it's going to be subject to all the controls of any other prescription medication, you're all out of business. It's going to big pharmacies, it's going to chain pharmacies, it's going to be produced by big pharma. We're seizing the industry from you. We would be out with the pitchforks and torches.
Absolutely.
Instead, all we have to do is say, well, we're going to make it, hey, guess what? You're right. It does have medical value. We're going to make it class 3. And everybody's like, oh, yeah. Well, no, it's the same thing. You're handing it over to them. And what do they have? Okay, what's the worst case scenario? Everybody agrees, and the federal government and big pharma seize the industry. And then before anybody has any idea to understand what's just happened, it's over. You're not going to undo that once it's done. You're not going to just take it back. Cannabis it's too politically divisive of a topic. People talk about 280E and they talk about research. If they wanted, you could very easily pass waivers at the federal level vis-a-vis the Safe Banking Act, which has been floating around out there for 5 years. The reason that still can't get passed, even though so many states, the majority of states, would benefit from that shows you how politically divisive this is. Why the hell would you want to roll the dice on this industry? And I use this term on the supposition that, well, they won't, but they will fix.
And let me just play total devil's advocate here. Let's just say this is what exactly as it's being pitched as, that they're trying to declare medical value and that they are going to treat it differently. That then, if I'm wrong, correct me. If like that leaves us subject to all those other drugs that we had mentioned in the Schedule 3, which is a large amount of them. There is a large amount of money there that is big pharma. Those guys are then able to sue the federal government for the fact that you can't treat this differently. So they have to treat it the same way, otherwise being subject to lawsuits.
The answer to everybody's thing is, well, but it's Schedule 1 and Schedule 1, and they don't enforce it, and the states do what they want, and blah, blah. Here's the difference. There are no big pharma producers of Schedule 1 substances. Schedule 1 substances are banned substances that are illicitly produced. They are part of a black market economy that nobody is supposedly engaging in, but big business isn't in it. They're not in it. They're not making any money off of it. You cannot treat cannabis and say, well, we're going to allow cannabis dispensaries that are outside the prescription only and outside of this, even though it's Schedule 3, we're going. The makers of Suboxone will sue. The makers of anabolic steroids and ketamine and Tylenol, all those companies are going to say, whoa, what about us? Why are we held standard? Can you imagine, like, the makers of Xanax? If they could see that and they're like, well, wait, that's a Schedule 3. We're a Schedule 4. We're safer than a Schedule 3. We're 4. Why can't we have a dispensary that offers benzodiazepines outside of prescription? Because you can't. That's why you can't do it, because it takes the characteristics of the class it's placed in. At that point, it's regulated by that class. That's the law. And you can't change it unless you change the law. Listen, could they carve out a special, Schedule 1 asterisk A? Sure, maybe they could. And it could have all of its own, but that would take a congressional action where the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, they've reopened it or they've decided that they're going to amend it, and the House of Representatives and the Senate come up with a bill, it gets passed, it goes to a president's desk, it's signed by the president, and there's a new class. That's the only way that this could happen. You would have
that's going to take a lot of time. We've got
it would never happen
until the presidential election.
It would never happen in a million years. It would never happen, because the people, if they can't pass the Safe Banking Act, what the hell makes anyone think that they could amend a law that's existing and on the books? And do you know what sort of lawsuits would be triggered if you tried to pass this? You know, I ironically, in the the enemy of my enemy is my friend, our best option right now is to hope that all these conservative groups that are fighting the normalization are successful. I disagree with them and their position 100%, but I have never rooted for them harder to be successful in stopping this rescheduling.
Yeah,
they want it because they think it belongs in Schedule 1. You don't ever, it's a gateway, it's dangerous, it's blah, 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 blah. So they're bombarding the DEA with those questions. Now, those are the sorts of comments, those are the sorts of objections that they'll listen to. Okay. Dangerous, gateway, all the old things. If they see that there's a lot of pushback from politically powerful organizations, politicians aren't going to want to touch it. Okay. And that takes you back to what we say comments. You have to say, if we were to do this, what's going to happen? Black market again. Black market returns. Criminalization returns.
The reason it would pump up all these things is because it eliminates the current market. So the current market's completely outlawed. Everyone who's operating in the industry can no longer operate in the industry, and even all the way up to the Verano, Trulieve, and all those other guys, let alone, I've had a lot of people ask me, like, well, what's this going to do to the little guy? Well, the little guy is just going to be a footnote in the whole thing. Actually, they're not even going to be a footnote. The big guy, the Trulieve, is going to be the footnote, if that. So The
Yeah,
little guy's
sure.
gone, the big guy's gone, the whole industry gone for a period of who even knows how long. I mean, just to get plants started up for flower periods already like 3 months as is. So that's just for that. And then on top of that, seeds, everything. It's just going to be such a long, drawn out period in which you're right. It completely destroys the industry that's currently existing as a whole.
Sure. And, what would happen? I mean, assuming that this craziness actually did happen, I mean, it would take a decade to effectively phase this in because it would be so complicated to do. But assuming that it just drops into the class and the regulations kick in, it's done. You're only going to be able to get it from a corner dealer. Everywhere that you can get it will be illegal at that point and your possession of it, this isn't us overlooking, because most states have decriminalized cannabis at the state level. They haven't decriminalized Schedule 3 at state level. Cannabis as a Schedule 1 is decriminalized. Once it's 3, it's not decriminalized. Now you're in for felony possession, just like if you were a steroid abuser or you were hooked on Suboxone. The same rules apply. That's the law. And that's why I keep telling people, that's the law. We can talk about what ifs. We could talk about this. We could talk about that. But you know what? If you are actually for Schedule 3, you better make sure that whatever they're doing, you have every single last minute detail worked out. It's all been spelled out very clearly why you think that it won't need a prescription. Let it go through the process. Let it survive the years of inevitable tie-ups in court when people challenge it. You've got to make sure before you take this move. But if you just embrace this, it's over. It's over. And that rule does not say anything other than everything that I'm saying, just not the way I'm saying.
Yeah, you're saying very much the way that people would be able to understand it. They're saying it in a way in which there's an 89-page draft that most of the people that are going to sign this off on aren't even going to read fully. But it's basically everything that you said here today, as well as what you said on the Adam Dunn show a couple weeks ago before they actually released the draft, which is also partly why I wanted to have you out in the public again, because now that we've had the draft release, a lot of people would say, oh, well, everything that he said is just totally speculation. Well, now it's no longer speculation. Now they've outlined this. This is what it is. There is no speculation. This is just what it is. So it's kind of change gears a little bit here. One thing that I was also asked very much so about with all this is, what does this mean for people with home grow? Because then doesn't that then make everyone who's home growing a federal criminal in a different way? It makes them, now you're producing a controlled substance of Schedule 3, which everyone in the home grow has been illegal. You're producing a controlled substance, which isn't that a felony, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, it turns you, you're on the same level as a methamphetamine cook.
Yeah.
That's basically what it comes down to. And, and more severe than that is you are also going to be in federal violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So you will not only be criminally prosecuted by the DEA for violations of that regulation, because remember something, methamphetamine is a Schedule 1. So FDA is not in it. It's not a drug. If you're caught producing or otherwise compounding and distributing, even for your own use, a controlled substance of Schedule 3 or whatever, now the FDA is involved because you're making it outside the pharmaceutical regulations of the FDA. So now you have multiple agencies are coming at you for this. So it's the home grow even gets even further away than it is right now. Why don't people home grow cocaine? I mean, when you think about it, it's really, growing cocaine is not that hard to do. But but why don't you see home grow? You don't see home grow because you're worse off with that than you are being a meth cook, really,
Yeah.
because of all
That's
the
one
different.
reason that they haven't currently equated the two between cannabis grower and the other ones previously is because they've been kind of like etched out through state stuff. But once we go to a Schedule 3, again, a lot of the state stuff just kind of gets trumped. It's no longer as valid as the federal stuff because the federal is a bigger entity and just kind of has that say so to be able to be like, no, we're not going to allow that anymore.
Let's. I mean, I'll give you. I'll give you some. We'll sort of go back a little bit to what we spoke in the beginning about. What if the government just says, well, we're not going to enforce? Well, okay. Well, we know first of all that's not true. But as long as that enforcement, that regulation is there, of course the government's going to enforce it. If you think that you're going to thumb your nose at the DEA as a state, all right, when something has been deemed a Schedule 3 substance, okay, the federal government can go to a state and say, okay, listen, I know that we overlooked the Schedule 1 thing for however many years. That was whatever it was. This is a Schedule 3 drug. You're violating federal regulations. You will stop and you will enforce the federal regs, or we're pulling your Medicaid funding, your federal Medicaid funding. No more federal dollars for your school district. They can get at you at the state level, they can get at you at the state level more easily and make states comply. Any state that takes or depends on federal dollars, and they all do.
Everyone. Except maybe tech.
All it takes is an administration that says, okay, we've had enough of this. Or you have an ideologue. I won't say if it's a right or left winger, because I think they're both kind of do the same thing sometimes. But let's just say you have an ideologue who crusades on this idea that there's going to be enforcement. If the law's on the book, which it is, and they just direct their DOJ to enforce. And the way like I said, the way they enforce it, use federal funding. Use your federal funding, A, B, C, D. It's what's your state's budget? Your state's budget's $20 billion. You're going to lose $4 billion of that 20. You ready for that? That's how the federal government will control the states. And keep in mind, it's not going to be the state that controls this. The supply chain controls it, because whoever's got that DEA license, which is a valuable thing, they sure as hell are not going to risk losing it by listening to a state that says, no, ignore what the DEA says. The state doesn't issue the DEA license, the federal government does. So if Verano, for instance, says, yeah, you know what? Yeah, we got a DEA license, so we can handle cannabis, but we're not going to require that down the supply chain. We're just going to ship this stuff off. That's not going to work. First of all, they would never do it, but that's how it's enforced. The federal government doesn't have to send the FBI in and raid every place. It's going to be handled by the big companies. They're not going to want to lose their DEA license and be out of business. If a Verano were to lose its DEA license, that's the end of Verano. There's no more Verano. And because their DEA license was revoked, all the people that were involved in that, they're now all on an exclusion list. They're never going to be able to be involved in any entity that has a DEA license. But I'm going to go to, I want to, because we all think that we believe that it has great medical value and all the things that we believe are positives and we know are positives about cannabis and why it's such a great, why it's such a great substance. We have the ability to really act as our own practitioners of herbal medicine, of nutraceuticals or therapeutics, and we have the ability to not have to adhere to I won't even call them guide rails because they're not guide rails, the strict regulations that are put on top of the medical profession when it comes to medicine. Think about this. Yeah. Ivermectin and Zithromax and hydroxychloroquine, these are old drugs that have been used for decades and decades and decades. safe, no side effects, whatever. COVID comes along, certain practitioners say, we're having good success giving this. FDA says, oh, wait a minute, well, we didn't approve it for that. And if you do that, we're pulling your medical license.
Yep.
That's now where you are. The FDA tells you what you can use that substance for. You, as a practitioner, you're licensed. And if the regulatory agencies do like they did during COVID, which I think people at the federal level should be prosecuted for what happened. With those,
I quote back to Dave Smith and Chris Cuomo. That's getting some eyes on it.
Those same drugs that they prohibited and took people's licenses away for recommending and told every pharmacy, you better make sure it's not for COVID or you're going to lose your license. Now, very quietly, it's recommended. You've never heard about this, but all of those drugs are recommended therapeutics for COVID now. But what happened if you did it? But that shows you something. I know, what I know from pharmacy is what people in Canada don't know, and that's the regulations. I'm not a practitioner. I'm not a professional that practices medicine and is a healer and can get creative and say, how would this work or how would that work, and try to help people. I don't. I'm an enforcement agent of the FDA, the DEA, the CDC, the NIH, and any other regulatory body. Because I'm licensed, I have to do exactly what they say. And some of the things that everybody in this industry can look forward to, if you get a prescription for any controlled substance filled in any pharmacy, the idea of anonymity, that's gone. You will have to provide name, address, date of birth, phone number, sex, prescriber information, name of the drug, how the drug was prescribed. So we know an eighth is supposed to last 30 days. All of this is going to have to be provided. And
I'll be honest, that doesn't feel entirely too far off, that portion of it, from the way Ohio's program was prior to the Board of Pharmacy coming in with the medical program. It is like, it feels like, because some of the feedback I've heard from people, especially on your Adam Dunn appearance, was, well, the way he's describing that sounds very much so like what we are. But we do like our PMP and things like that, but what we're missing, that I feel like you're adding here, is we can't say, all right, here, you're coming into the dispensary as I'm a bud tender, you're coming into the dispensary, you're telling me you've got anxiety and you can't sleep and you've got this, that, and the other. So me as a bud tender who's experienced and understands the product registry very well, and understands, all right, well, I can give you some CBN for sleep, I can give you this one over here because this has got certain terpenes that'll help you with your anxiety most of the time, but if this one doesn't work, then this one would probably be a little bit like, I can't do that stuff within the realm of when we start dealing with the federal Schedule 3 stuff, because at that point it's specifically targeted, like the FDA regulated and approved it for this specific thing. Like, this specific SKU is only approved for anxiety. You can't give it to someone who's got a prescription for sleep apnea.
You're going way too far. There are no more bud tenders. Somebody comes in with a prescription. That prescription is written by a licensed prescriber. I'll say prescriber because more than just doctors can prescribe these days. A licensed prescriber that will get handed to the pharmacist. The pharmacist will dispense it exactly the way it says on that prescription. There will be a day supply attached to it. So I don't know if the FDA deems that an eighth of Brownie Scout is supposed to last 30 days, going to get it every 30 days, not every 29, not every 15, every 30 days. And you will get it every 30 days because every day we will have to upload that information into a national database. And anywhere you go in the nation with that, another prescription, say, okay, well, I'll go to another doctor and I'll get another prescription, go to another pharmacy. Well, good luck doing that, because if you try that, first of all, the doctor is supposed to check first. The pharmacy will definitely check first if the doctor doesn't. And if you dispense it, you're going to get a call from the DA. Is going to say, well, wait a minute. Tony Minnitti just got an eighth of Brownie Scout a week ago. It's supposed to last 30 days. What's this? Why did you give it to him after 7 days?
Yeah.
We're going to come down. We need to see your records. That's where I am. That's where this is heading.
Again, that's not entirely too far from where Ohio is just starting to get away from. Like, these are all things that were similar headed, because we do have a day supply system set up, but it's really weird. It's arbitrary. There is no eighths in Ohio. You probably heard the term the Ohio tenth, because they're split up into tenths. It's 10 days supply is going to be an ounce. We sell it in 2.83s with rec going on. The current medical market operators are the only ones able to purchase rec licenses, and they'll be dual use licenses, which I don't even understand how they're able to do this portion of it, but they're able to sell the medical metric stuff under the recreational metric stuff. It's a whole mess, and it's really confusing. It doesn't make any sense, but it sounds like we're basically going back to that, but like even farther, because I'm assuming you probably couldn't buy it in a single day supply and then come back in the next day and buy that single day supply. You probably have to buy it by the 30-day supply or 90 or 60.
Typically, you would go, typically they discourage 60 and 90-day supply in controlled substance dispensing unless a patient has a terminal condition like cancer or HIV. So it's tough that's a tough thing to do. In Jersey, once you show us your ID that you're 21 and you enter a dispensary, the rest of it's anonymous. You can tell me you're Mickey Mouse, and that's what we're going to sell it to you under, because that's the law in New Jersey. So some states that don't have the medical limitation, but you seem like you're in a hybrid, but if you think it's bad now, it gets much, much worse.
That's kind of what I'm saying, is it feels like we're slowly going closer to the anonymity market, because the bill was regulate like alcohol as much as the lawmakers are trying to not make it like alcohol for our rec program. But our med program is slowly starting to get away from all of that stuff. But it sounds like to me, basically, we're going to be going right back to it and then some. Like, it's going to get worse than what it was previously.
If it's Schedule 3, you don't have to worry about that, because the state regs don't matter. It's a DEA regulated. The DEA, read the DEA, the 60-page DEA manual, and it'll tell you exactly all the regulations that you will be required to follow. That's what it comes down to. I mean, and that's what I keep telling people. Read the manual. It's right in the manual. It tells you. There's no supposition. There's no, there's no, it may be or it won't, or read the manual. That's the only thing I can say. And the rule as published basically says it's going to follow the manual. So if they tell you that's what they're going to do, I would believe them. And I would say that I don't want, and I always say this as somebody, some people think that for some inexplicable reason that I'm anti-cannabis, which couldn't be farther from the truth. I got laughed at for saying this, but, it's when I go back to the very beginning when I was talking about having cannabis through a pharmacy, because, I felt that was, as a pharmacist, it's kind of the way I felt it should be. It'd be like, well, why would you have this, like, not in a pharmacy? But if it became pharma, I always say that it's like, I'm like the Terminator from that movie, when Schwarzenegger comes back in the second one and the girl goes crazy, what was her name, Sarah Connor or whatever, because she thinks he's there to start, and he's like, come with me if you want to live. That's what I'm saying to this industry now. I know what scheduling is going to do, because I spent a career under the thumb of these regulatory agencies, and you don't understand. And I know people look at me skeptically because I am from pharma and I am a pharmacist, and what I say.
I really feel like that's all specifically why I genuinely appreciate you speaking out about all this, because if we're being real, you could just very easily keep your mouth shut, keep quiet, know what's going on, and you could just as easily, because you're already under the same roof, You could just easily sell the one portion of your business off to the other entity and you're just fine. You don't have to worry about too much. Like there's certain things that you have to do differently, but you could have a plan of attack very easily and just not say anything. But you're out here, you're trying to sound the alarm. You're trying to tell people like, look, like this isn't just for your own gain. This is because you're passionate about the industry just as all the rest of us are. You understand things from a pharmacological standpoint, and you understand things from a political standpoint, and understanding that there's about to be a clash, and that like if we as a people don't come out as a united front against this, that this is ultimately where this is going to go is not in a good direction for we the people, not in a good direction for cannabis as a medicine, because as a medicine there's a lot of potential use for it between full spectrum therapeutics in general. If big pharma gets a hold of it, what's going to happen is we're going to have isolates. We're going to have things like the Marinol situation, where again, the reason that the Marinol didn't really work that well, in my opinion, is more than likely because they're focusing on the isolation. If anyone's ever tried a cart that's a distillate cart without any terpenes in it, yeah, you feel it a little bit, but it's not the same as a cart that has full spectrum extract, has terpenes in it, has maybe even some minor cannabinoids in it. Like you notice all of those things, which means that there's different therapeutic effects for each one of those substances, and combined they make a significantly better potential therapeutic than in isolation. Whereas the pharmacy industry tends to be isolated molecules, isolated things, and that's not how cannabis works as a medicine. Again, we're going back to like old school pharmacy botany, things like that, where there's so many factors there that we're just trying to figure it out.
And as since I've spent a career, or I should say, I spent a lifetime. I mean, I'm 54 years old now, so I've spent 40 of my 54 years actively engaged in the pharmacy profession. I've seen so many things of the way it's gone, and I remember and can recollect well when pharmacists had more freedom, when they were able to be the emergency room for a community, and you didn't have doctors, you didn't have all these regulations, and how fulfilling that was, where you could actually take knowledge and you could apply it to help people. Now, I'm not saying that in all cases that was the best thing. As we go through time, there are unscrupulous people, and we do have the FDA, and there are reasons that we have those agencies, and a lot of it was to protect people from the bad elements. But what I don't like about this profession and what's happened is how it's become, again, we're nothing more than the regulatory arm of all of these agencies. We have to be the enforcement agent. If you want this substance, we've got it. We've got to make sure you're getting it the way they say you want to get it, and the way this one's. It's a terrible way to practice if you're actually an enthusiast. And I love the freedom that I have with cannabis. And even though you're right, for all those that think I've got some other motive here, hey, I'm going to be the only game in town if this happens. I have a DEA license. I've got a dispensary and a pharmacy that are 2 feet from one another. For me, when the whole industry is cast into chaos, I'm the only place that anybody's going to be able to go, because nobody else has this. Pharmacists don't all want this. A lot of pharmacists don't want what we talked about before. They don't agree. They won't dispense cannabis. Then that'll be a whole thing. So rescheduling would be nothing but better. But I don't want to see what happened to pharmacy imposed on cannabis. We've worked so hard as enthusiasts, as in grassroots individuals over the course of decades, to change hearts and minds of the public, of the politicians, of having to get to the point where we could say to people, see, we told you so. We've done all the hard work. We've built the infrastructure. Finally, we've got it. And it's like, I feel like we're throwing away something that's 95% perfect because we think we can achieve 100%. And if we do that, you're going to get 0%. And that's what nobody understands. We built this. Why should we hand this over? Where was Big Pharma? Where have you been? Big Pharma.
They've been demonizing it. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember back in the day hearing ads, things like, "Oh, well, I tried pot once and now I'm gay." And here we are in Pride Month. If you said anything like that now in the ad space, they would have a field day with that. But that's the way that the messaging was back in the 90s and the 2000s. I mean, the DARE program, that was all the people that are now going to be beneficiaries of all the stuff that we've done. Like, we're going to let all the guys who demonized us day and night on the evening news become the guys who get all the money and all
Right.
the revenue.
Let me talk about this
Which
for a second, some history, okay? The whole impetus for California's first initiative for legalized medical cannabis was for the treatment of patients who had terminal conditions like cancer and HIV. Really kind of put it over the top, although HIV is not quite the same as it was back then now. But to give them relief from pain that was uncontrolled by the current drugs that were available. The same OxyContin, the same Percocet, the same hydrocodone, dilaudid, morphine, all the things that sparked the opiate epidemic were the drugs that were deemed ineffective, which is why they wanted to use cannabis, because those drugs, the opiates, were not working, because the endocannabinoid doesn't work the same way as the opiate feedback system works. And it didn't work. Now, if we had had access to cannabis, then would we have ever had the opiate epidemic? I would say it probably would have never, ever happened. You wouldn't have
at very least, it wouldn't have been the same. It 100% would not have been as effective. It wouldn't have been, you wouldn't have seen buildings next to each other where you can just go into one, buy a whole bunch, and then go into the next one with another prescription. And that's another thing. They've tightened a lot of things up within the Controlled Substances Act because of like the pill mills and things like that way back in the day. That was an issue. So because of now that, again, if we go to Schedule 3, we're then going to be under all the same regulations that all of those guys did because of all the mistakes that they've made.
Sure. And also, not only that, it's when I go back to my grandfather's days, I have prescription labels for compounds that there was no prescription for it. You didn't have any special license to get this, but you could buy opium, and it was used for a lot of different things. Regular poppy-based opium. And look at the difference between opium and then what's happened to it when they chemically manipulated it and moved it to where we are with fentanyl, where, you know, a grain, which is such a small unit of measure, can almost kill you. That's what happens when Big Pharma gets a potentially good botanical, gets into a lab with it, and tweaks it this way and tweaks it that way and says, well, let's see what happens if we add this hydroxy group to it or this methyl group to it. Let's see how potent we can make it so we don't have to make as much to make more money. That's where this is all heading. If you turn this over to Big Pharma, that's where it's heading. Or Big Pharma may just buy it all out and put it on the shelf. That's something that I say is a distinct possibility. They've got the money to buy the rights to cannabis. Take it, shelve it.
Yep. And one of the big fears of that the industry's all had for a long time is I know there's a couple chemovars that the federal government's patented for medical uses and things like that. So with that being said, is it going to boil down to like 7 chemovars of cannabis and that's the only thing that there is? It's going to become like a monocrop agriculture where back in the day we used to have all kinds of different bananas, but now there's one single cultivar of banana. And in fact, that's actually starting to die out because of funguses and things like that. So it's kind of that moment of eventually like, that's the big fear of all the little guys is that the big guy's going to take it over and start doing those types of things.
Sure. Don't you think, look at this, with everything that's happened to big tobacco, you don't think their mouths are watering for cannabis to get rescheduled so they can repurpose, if they haven't already, those massive cultivation facilities for cannabis? You don't think they could do that? I'm convinced it's already done. The only thing that stops it is because it's state by state and you don't have the erasure of all the lines. So you can't have all your cultivation in North Carolina or down south because you can't send it out of North Carolina. So in so many ways, the Schedule 1 protects us Costco could never deal in cannabis because what state by state by state. Like is that what because that's what happens. If you take away the Schedule 1 thing, I know it's a pain in the ass. I would rather be able to deduct certain taxes. We could have that. There's no reason we couldn't have that absent the Schedule 3 thing. You could have research. You telling me that the government wasn't doing research with LSD? We all
Yep.
They weren't experimenting with psilocybin and peyote and all of these quote, of course they do. The government will always want to, so we don't need that for research. All we have to do is we have to demand. Just like we demanded to get where we are now, we need to demand that the government address things like safe banking and research outside of making it a Schedule 3 and taking control of the industry. They're saying, okay, we're going to give what you want, but not until we get what we want. And that's
or if they're gonna touch in on a schedule substance, just deschedule it. Because I think we've, again, like you said, from a grassroots movement, we've proved so much. There's studies in Israel. There's, like, you want to talk about research, this is probably the most researched single plant out there. So there's tons of research. It's just a matter of, are they acknowledging it or not? And again, if you acknowledge it, then at that point it makes more of an argument to deschedule it rather than reschedule it. Because if you deschedule, we don't have any of those issues that we've talked about. We don't have to worry about having prescriptions or removing home grow rights or the industry as a whole just collapsing because of the fact that no one can operate without a DEA license. So if they deschedule it, that would probably be the smartest move to make it not criminal, to not make it so much of an issue. And that's if they were to touch it at all.
Right.
I've heard people make the argument that honestly, keeping it at a Schedule 1 is probably better than a deschedule as a whole. I've seen people make both arguments.
I would rather it stay Schedule 1. But if you're fixated on this idea that you don't want it, it's got to be deschedule, reschedule. If it's descheduled and we treat it like alcohol, at least every state gets to basically run it the way they would want to run it. Because as we've just learned, what works in Jersey is never going to fly in Ohio. And what
different regulators
about this country, we're not a homogenous country. Everybody thinks that we're this one entity. We are a constitutional republic of independent states, and that's
the beautiful thing about it.
So we have to try to, in this regard, we have to try to preserve each state's right to do this the way they want. And the federal government has said, okay, we're going to respect that as long as there's some reasonable parameters. That's the way you leave it. If you deschedule it, again, I prefer the federal one, but if it's not, then deschedule it. And it's kind of dealt with like instead of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, it'll be alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, and firearms. That's like that would be the federal only role in it at that point if it's descheduled. And look, there's precedent for this. They tried to schedule tobacco as a controlled dangerous substance. The tobacco industry was able to stop that. They wouldn't allow it to be regulated. And I would submit that tobacco, as somebody who smoked cannabis and tobacco, I can tell you that I find tobacco to be the most addictive thing that I've ever encountered.
Yeah. And AA uses it to help them get off of other things in Canada. So, I mean, it's quite literally the opposite of all the things that they demonized it as back in the day. They said that it killed brain cells. Well, we've actually found out now that after the age of 16, it actually stimulates brain growth. They said that it was highly addictive. We actually find out now that it actually helps get people off of opioids and substances that are addictive. So it's just wild to me that it's always quite the opposite of the demonization.
I can tell you that I've seen anecdotally countless examples of alcoholics who were chronic, relapsing, switched to medical marijuana and never drink again. And it was something that was unfathomable to them. Now they're vaping left and right, but that better, right? I mean, vaping, okay, maybe it's not the best thing for your lungs. It's not going to kill you like being an alcoholic will. You're not going to be riding your car into walls and all the other craziness that goes along with that. You're not missing work, so it's got good applications even for addiction therapy. And that was one of the points I was making is as part of, why kind of the medical aspect of it should be kept in mind. But one final thing, you were talking about the terpenes. You talked about the bottles that I have and all that. For years, I've collected these gold leaf style glass bottles that the raw materials used to come in. And I mean, they haven't been used since like the between 1890 and 1930. That was pretty much the end of them.
That's awesome.
I would always go and try to see what they were. Do you know there are every terpene, I've seen bottles with the gold leaf label where the terpene was isolated and something that they were able to add to compounding back then. And I never knew what any of the stuff was. I just didn't know. It never occurred to me because I didn't know what a terpene was. And they don't teach you that in pharmacy school. But the more I got cannabis, and I'm like looking, because I have all these bottles at home and like in the pharmacy, and I'm like, wait a minute. I was like, holy shit, eucalyptol. And I'm like, all of a sudden it clicked. Like, these are all the terpenes were isolated, and you could actually get the terpene and add it into whatever you were mixing back then. I mean, how cool is that? But
that's really cool. I mean, that's where I feel like the future of the industry is starting to slowly head, which honestly, I mean, you want to talk about like some lost civilization, lost knowledge stuff. I mean, I feel like that's exactly what we're walking into. And honestly, you just confirmed a lot of that for me, that I was actually going to ask you, like, what was some of the old school pre-prohibition stuff that you found that are like that? Because I would not have expected them to be that far advanced with it, to where they've isolated specific terpenes and compounds. I mean, it makes sense pharmacologically speaking. Again, we all look at things as molecular structures and compounds and how they interact on each receptor and yada, yada, yada. But like, I really wouldn't have thought that however long ago we would be onto that stuff already. That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it was. See, there was no thing. We take it for granted. There was no antibiotics until 1950. There was no insulin, for diabetics. All of this stuff didn't exist, so everything just came from these different herbal bulk powders that they would mix together in different concentrations, and they would figure out how to get these different effects with it. And I think that's where I think that we could have more medically based cannabis approaches.
Yeah, double-blind placebo studies and stuff like that, but anecdotal stuff matters.
We should decide that as an industry, okay? It shouldn't be the DEA telling us what it is. They fucked it up every step of the way so far. What makes you think they're going to get this one right? They haven't gotten it right yet. So,
yeah, and again, I think COVID really, if not for everyone else, it definitely illustrated to me the levels at which a lot of these things, test studies for a lot of prescription drugs, are kind of manipulated and kind of geared into such a way where it's more just about getting the stuff passed, getting it on the market, and getting it sold than it is anything else. And it seems like there's a lot of ways that things can be manipulated one way or the other, that it really is just, let's get it on the market and get it out there, than it is about what a real true enthusiast pharmacist would prefer to have it. Which again, so much props to you, dude, because it's nice to see people out there on both sides of the industry. And like I said, with people in Ohio, I mean, I've met people that they've come from the pharmacology world to come over to run dispensaries. Shout out to Amplify AJ. He's the dispensary that I look at as a medical dispensary, because they're trying to focus on things like, all right, what ails you and how can we try and match you with the right product, rather than just force feeding you the most expensive product or treating it like a fine dining thing and just trying to get you to buy the top line product. Like, we're trying to get you the right medicine for you.
What's great about what I have, having the pharmacy and the dispensary side by side, is for a lot of years, certain things, I come from an interesting perspective, because I don't think cannabis is a cure-all for everything. And,
no.
I think it's a far better alternative for a lot of the most, what I view to be the most problematic drugs. Ambien, Lumesta, sleep, all those sleeping agents, bad stuff. You shouldn't be on them for any more than 7 days. People are on those things for years. tinkers with your brain chemistry. You get a sleepwalking zombie sort of effect out of it. It's unnecessary. If you take any sleepy time CBN based indica, you're going to sleep 8 hours and you're not going to be hungover the next day. You're not going to get up in the middle of the night and get in your car and start driving around and not have any recollection of it.
Right.
The diazepines, horrible. Those are never supposed to be used the way they're used. And people are on them for years and years. And if you want to talk about withdrawal, try to come off as Xanax. You'll find out.
When we talk about withdrawal, benzodiazepines can kill you if you just come off of them, because that was the issue Jordan Peterson had, is he had to wean himself off of them to come off of them. Otherwise, it could have potentially killed him.
Right. And
alcohol's about it.
Yeah, I can tell people, listen, let's work with getting you off of this. And you look at, there's 1906 has a great product. I guess I'll show for it because it's a good one. They're chill.
Yeah.
Chill tablets. Perfect.
I'm really glad to see that you have them, especially at your dispensary, because that was actually something, his products, Peter's, over at 1906, I did their Genius pills, and those were my personal favorites. But you mentioned the chill one. I actually had a gentleman who they pulled them off of the Ohio market. I pray to God this gentleman got enough of them to keep them stocked, because he was taking a quarter of one and he got off of all of these other prescription medications. He was telling me that he had such bad anxiety to where he couldn't go to a family gathering with 7 people without having like a straight up panic attack in a corner, in a ball, like just desensitized from everything. It was honestly, genuinely one of the most terrifying experiences I could imagine, the way he described it. He came back in a week or two after I gave him his consultation and put him on the 1906 chill pills. He seemed like a new man. You would have never known he had the level of anxiety he had. And that was where all of those prescription drugs that he was on dozens of them. This was his last resort. He felt like he had no other option. He literally cried to me, him and his wife. It hurts just thinking about how bad he had to have struggled to get to this point. For the 1906 chill pills, which is majority like 5 CBD to 1 THC, if I'm not mistaken, and other botanical things that are there to try and help relax one. Those are the things that we should be looking forward to in the industry, not pharmacy getting a hold of it and changing it.
We talk about the danger of cannabis to a developing brain. And I'm not going to argue the science of if that's true or not, but you mean to tell me giving people Adderall is a good thing? When I talk about like the history of things, when I'm part of cleaning out my grandfather's pharmacy back then, I came upon a case of a product and it was called Obitrol. And I opened it up and I looked at it. I'm like, this is weird stuff. And it's the exact formulation for Adderall. And I asked my grandfather, I'm like, what would they use this for? And he said, back in the 50s, if women didn't want to show pregnancy, they gave them this, because it's 3 salts of the 3 amphetamine salts combined together. So they could go through pregnancy without showing a bulge. That was what the Obitrol was for. They reformulated it, and it's Adderall, and they're giving this to kids. And I'm like, how could you do this? I think I'm telling you, you're going to find out one day. Adderall is going to be the scandal over Adderall, and what that's done to a generation of kids is going to far eclipse whatever happened with the Sacklers and OxyContin. Write it down.
Yeah, seriously.
But if kids are that bad off, wouldn't it be a little safer to maybe try them on the chill, and instead of trying to ramp them up so much that they get that what they call the paradoxical reaction of you overload the brain so it deregulates itself down, which is really a backward way of looking at it. But that's how Ritalin and that work. Why not just try to give them something that may take the edge off of their hyperactivity a little bit? Yeah. And these are the things that we can look at, and we can make these recommendations. Obviously, we can't really recommend it for kids, but
actually in Ohio, there are children that are part of the program. I personally have dealt with children. They have to have their parent there. If they're under the age of 18, they do have to have their parent there. They are not allowed to have smokables or inhalants. They are basically only limited to edibles, which again, The chill pill perfectly fit that person. The child had PTSD from incidents in his own personal childhood. He was like middle school time frame, so I have no idea. It's not my person. But I can say that he, again, even a child, you don't want to give them large amounts of THC. CBD genuinely does have a lot of other medical benefits that would then help a child, but has not shown any of the a lot of the time pseudoscience saying that it's harmful to children in large quantities. You don't have that with CBD. So I feel like, again, like even children can benefit from this stuff. Not saying that necessarily we're recommending it to them, but it's understanding the nuances of it to be able to get them to do it. Because again, I've personally seen it in Ohio. Benefits.
It's, when you're so many of the drugs, like even the antidepressants and things like that, they really, nobody, if you read the literature, they don't really know exactly how they work. They talk about the kind of, they use interesting terminology about the suspected mechanism of action, or the mechanism of action is thought. That means they don't know. That's what that means. But all of tinkers with brain chemistry. And when you're tinkering around in brain with brain chemistry and receptors and serotonin reuptake inhibitors and all these different things that cause all these chemical changes in the brain, why not try something that's not going to chemically affect the brain? It's going to act on the endocannabinoid system, and while you're taking something, but it's like nobody would think twice about recommending chamomile tea if you couldn't go to sleep. So why wouldn't you treat cannabis the same way? It's an herbal. It exerts an effect. Why don't we look at it and treat cannabis like we do these other herbal remedies? Humphrey's remedies were very popular at the time. There are lots of different non-traditional therapeutics that, everybody, okay, well, it's something you can try, and, it's not FDA approved. That's a caveat. And, you can't go on, you can't advertise and say, yes, if you take this indica, you will have ABC. Sure, we won't be able to do that, but we don't need to. If we have people that come,
to be honest, we can say that specific terpenes can give specific reactions, because there has terpenes, essential oils as a whole, aren't illegal to research. You can do double-blind placebo test studies on them. Things like linalool have been shown for great for anxiety. You said something about the German chamomile, that's bisabolol. Also shown great for anxiety, sleep. So we can then still use those to kind of gear in the right direction without even just being like, well, this is an indica and this is, we can get very scientific with it, again, like the old school pharmacological approach, trying to use specific things.
My reference is more towards advertising, like on TV, like advertising in general. No, I mean, when we're not, all we're doing is making recommendations based on anecdotal knowledge, what our research shows. It crosses into another realm, and that's why the Schedule III thing is so important. Once it's a drug and you're saying this treats this, game over. It's got to go through the FDA at that point. Has to do it. I don't know if you guys have the Balance of Nature products commercials up there where you are, but Balance.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, down here it's like I don't know. It's all these different nutrients or whatever, and their advertising was get a little too close towards this solves this or this solves that, and that's FDA bang jumps right in and says can't do that. It's got to go through FDA approvals. But as long as it's not being prescribed by a licensed physician, it doesn't have to be. As long as it exists outside, that's where we want to keep this. We want to keep this where we control it, not where we become agents of what the 3-letter agencies tell us we're supposed to do. And that's what we give up with reschedule. And I guess that's really what the ultimate end to all this is. Rescheduling means, again, Controlled Substance Act. They tell you what is going to happen in the title.
Yep, it's very, very narrow scope that we're allowed to operate in.
Right. If we want to control, we need to fight that. The control belongs to us in the industry and the individual states. It's the closest that we'll ever get, ironically, to the way this country is really supposed to run, versus one blanket swipe that all 50 states and territories have to abide by. Rescheduling will change everything. And I would say we've got it pretty good, and I would not let perfection, be the enemy over, almost perfect. I could just tell you, you don't want to be me. You don't want to be a pharmacist. You don't want to be regulated the way pharmacy is. People ask me, there is more regulation for Sudafed, for over-the-counter allergies. There's more regulation on that in New Jersey than there is cannabis. That should give you an idea of how free we have it, relatively speaking. And, anybody that thinks that, oh, well, the tax exemptions, it's expensive? DEA compliance. And the only thing more expensive than DEA compliance is the cost of non-compliance.
Which actually, we just touched on some real quick there that I do want to touch on that I don't think we've talked about is, so currently the states all run these programs. These are state programs that are all these fundings stay within the state. The taxes are, you're able to tax these substances. Correct me if I'm wrong, but under the Schedule 3, those states would no longer be allowed to generate revenue with those programs because it's a Schedule 3 substance, and you can't tax a Schedule 3 substance.
Correct. There's no taxation. There's no taxing. I don't believe federally there is no tax allowed on prescription medication. Every state may be different. I mean, conceivably, a state could tax a prescription drug if it wanted to. It would be extremely unpopular, and I doubt highly that would happen. But no, there would be no taxes anymore. It just isn't. Yep. It's like, it would be the same as taxing anything else. So the states would lose the revenue. And so. Yeah, I mean, that part of it is true. And also keep in mind, if it becomes a pharmaceutical, now the insurance industry will start to determine what it covers and what it doesn't.
Which was going to be another question I was going to ask is, do you think, as much as I really don't want to talk about the pros of what could potentially happen, but does that mean that insurance companies could then cover potentially like cannabis? It may not be good cannabis, but it would.
Insurance companies could. You think that it's good, but it isn't, because insurance companies are worse than Big Pharma and DEA combined. They'll tell you.
We'll see the $3,000 pound come back, that's for sure, and then some.
Here's the way it works in pharma. Okay, there's a product called Pensed that we covered. It was a great topical use for joint pain. So my cost to buy this, it was expensive. My cost, it would cost me $2,385 for one bottle. The insurance company would only pay us maybe $24.25. So I had to put out $23.85 to make less than $100, and insurance companies only pay you every 30 days. So you have to put the money out, give the medication out, and wait 30 days for that to come in. The days of getting something and marking it up 100% like they do in cannabis, you buy it for $5, you sell it for $10 in most cases, that's done.
Yep.
You'll pay for $5 and the insurance company will pay you $5.05. That's the way it works in pharma. That's why all the pharmacies are going out of business, because that's what happens when insurance gets a hold of it. So is it potentially good that people may have access to it at no cost? It might be. But but
it might not be the greatest quality either. It might be.
Right. You're going to get whatever cannabis company kicks the most money back to the insurance company. So you may think this 1906 chill, that's the thing you want to get. If 1906 didn't pay their VIG to whatever insurance company it is, they won't cover the 1906. They'll say, you got to get this one. And it may or may not work for you. That's what happened. All the things that you don't like prior authorizations, all that. You may have insurance coverage, but it's going to be subject. Now you got the DEA, the prescriber, the FDA. Now the insurance company has their hand in it, telling you what you're going to get. Is that worth it? To me, no.
And with that being said, do you watch South Park at all?
I used to watch it a lot more in the beginning, but I do see.
So the newest episode, they go very, very hard on the health insurance industry and the Ozempic issue that's been going on. Like they pretty much hit the nail on on the head with this one. Absolutely. They send you through the runaround. It's first you got to go, all right, well, we're not going to cover it. But if you really want to put in the extra effort, we can cover it. But what you have to do is you have to go to this doctor and get a second recommendation and prove to them that through all these other tests that then you can get it. And then you go do this one and then you go do that one. And maybe we'll cover 50% of it. Maybe. It's again,
That's
like
exactly what it's
yeah,
like.
like the insurance companies may cover it, but they also might as well just say, well, we don't think that it's a necessity, so your insurance doesn't cover this one.
Yeah. Listen, what we have right now is the freest of choice in a market that we can get, right? You know, if I'm charging too much for my 1906 and there's another dispensary that's got a discount on it for 35% off or whatever, and I decide I don't want to match it, but they can go there. That's what we have. We have choice. We have competition. We're all engaging in this market, and we all make different business decisions based on where we are and the type of clients that we want in our dispensaries and how we run our dispensaries. All that is completely up to us. That all in pharmacy. In pharmacy, you get a list of regulations and you got to follow them. And when you don't want to be, if anybody thinks it's bad now because they got to get on Metric and do this and upload that, you've got no idea. No idea what's coming if you get into the pharmacy business. I go over the dispensary side every day, and it's like going from, Iron Curtain, Russia. When you had Germany was East and West back in the day, it was like going from the Iron Curtain across to the free side. That's what it's like, and that's what I don't want to see happen to this industry.
Yeah, you don't want to see us go to the Iron Curtain and all be under that.
Yeah, right. The dispensary is sunlight and freedom and free choice, and everybody's at. Then you go to the pharmacy side, you're back in the friggin' gulag, and that's what I don't want to see happen. And I'm a pharmacist, people. Keep this in mind. I'm a pharmacist. I own both of them, and I'm telling you, I'm the only one has any authority to tell you I've seen both. And with one goes, got the other. So, it's not like I'm rooting for one versus. I'm just saying we've got it so good. And you just don't understand how good we have it. But you'll definitely remember how good we had it if we don't stop this Schedule III thing. And then because once it hits that, it's not going back. It won't go back. Once the federal government's gotten it, they're not giving it back. So
especially now that for the longest time they have not had any control over it when they used to have control over it, and trying to get control back from them in general is just it's not likely. It's such an uphill battle. You might as well try and announce a prevention as 100% worth a pound of cure, and anyone in the grow industry understands that. Again, so just a couple other questions that, again, might potentially be positive about Schedule III. Workman's comp issues. So if someone does have a prescription, wouldn't that mean that technically at that point, that if they got hurt at work and they failed for a drug test, that they might still be eligible for workman's comp?
If you get hurt at work, New Jersey's toying with an idea of offering a state-sponsored workman's comp coverage for cannabis. And the idea is to try to get, especially their state workers, off of any opiates, because the costs of opiate treatment and opiate abuse and addiction are far greater than paying for people's cannabis. So at the state level, programs can be put in place that would allow individuals to get payment for cannabis. I can tell you that we offer a pretty significant discount if you're a workman's comp patient on the pharmacy side, and we think we can transition you off an opiate or something like that. We offer like a 20% discount off on the dispensary side, try to let people make it more affordable. Now, as long as the federal Schedule I issue is in place, unfortunately, because insurance companies administer the workman's comp benefit, overall, they can't transact it. But if you had the Safe Banking Act, then you could. Then insurance companies could cover it. And it could, but state levels can make those decisions. If it's state dollars, the state can do that. The state could assess a fee or a tax, on all cannabis purchases to fund a workman's comp program. So there are lots of options out there. The answer to your question, would it be? Yes, it could be. But keep in mind, just because it's scheduled,
but it'd be worth it. At that point, I don't think it's worth it. I like that you put up other options, though.
But keep in mind, just because it's Schedule 3 doesn't mean it's automatically going to get covered by workman's comp. It'll be eligible, but that doesn't mean they're going to cover it. They still say no. It's still an insurance company. Just because it's workman's comp and not CVS Caremark or Express Scripts or a PBM, that doesn't mean that they're going to cover it. That just means it would be eligible to be covered. There's plenty of drugs that are regular drugs that workman's comp won't cover. So that's the one thing that people don't understand. It would become eligible, but that doesn't mean that they would probably view it as having a recreational component, and they would make it very, very difficult for people to get cannabis through a workman's comp program. You'd be back to the Cartman trying to get the Ozempic episode. That's what you're going to go to the workman's comp level. So, but yes, it would become eligible. Do I think it would be broadly? No, because I don't think insurance companies would make it that easy.
Yeah, and I agree. Insurance companies definitely do not make anything easy, it feels like, especially if you're trying to get money from them. It seems like it's good luck.
Right.
Is there anything else that you noticed from like the old school pharmaceutical days that you're like, man, I was really impressed that I noticed that they had this, or I just feel like that's one thing that I don't know a whole lot about. I remember seeing, I think we've all seen that bottle online of like the little tincture that had like cocaine and cannabis extract, but it didn't say what specifically, and then there was like a couple other little things in there. Was there anything else really cool that you found within that?
Well, if you go within, there's something called the United States Pharmacopoeia, or Pharmacopoeia, how people pronounce it all different ways. From back in the 20s and 30s, cannabis is listed in there with every other regular drug. In fact, it's right after Cascara Sagrada is cannabis. And they go into the different, is basically what that book represented at the time was almost an encyclopedia of every drug that there was. So if there was a drug that had a pharmaceutical use, it wound up in this book. And that book would be possessed by all physicians at the time, and pharmacists would have it. And physicians would look at it to try to guide recommendations, and pharmacists would be able to review it for guidance on how to compound. So it would tell you how to compound cannabis for this or for that. They would break it down. Sometimes there would be an Indian cannabis versus regular cannabis, and they would get into sativa based, broadly more sativa versus indica. I haven't delved into if all the terpenes are in there, but I would suspect they would be.
If you're finding like a bottle of eucalyptol, right, I would imagine they're probably in there.
Yeah, it would have to be, right? So, but yeah, so that's one of those things, and it just goes back to, this was commonly used as a medicine. And I will say this: if you've got to look at one positive thing about the war on cannabis and prohibition for all these years, they never got their hands on it.
Yeah.
They never got their hands on it. Every other drug that I have those bottles of, they got their hands on and they fucked it up. Whether it was morphine to become hydromorphone, oxymorphone, the dilaudid products, everything that I've got those labels of that were raw materials that didn't wind up on, federally prohibited completely like cannabis. They got their hands on every one of those substances and ruined them. And they never could do that with cannabis But here we are. We're at this pivotal moment where we're ready to hand it over to them. If they had their way back then and they made this, like opium and like all these, all the botanicals that they utilized and they chemically altered over the years, and now the botanicals that you don't even hear about, they don't exist. Cannabis would have been ruined too, but it didn't.
That's one of the biggest fears of all of us little guys within the industry, all of us who are passionate about it, is that, again, like I said, once big business and big pharma and big crop or big agro and everyone that's big in the industries, they tend to monocrop. They tend to isolate it down to one isomer. They tend to make it to where it's literally like just this one thing and this one thing only, and there is no diversity allowed. Whereas within cannabis, I mean, we have so much diversity, it's insane. But I mean, again, if you look back in time, everything used to be like that. But over time, they've isolated it down to like one or two things that are FDA approved. Or
what a perfect example of it is? It's what you said in the very beginning, cocaine. Cocaine is a wonderful substance. It's a wonderful drug as far as the different utilizations. Keep in mind, Coca-Cola was developed by a pharmacist, and the Coca-Cola originally, that was cocaine. It was ground coca leaves. That was what gave it sort of this, this little bit of kick to it back then, I guess, because probably didn't have caffeine like you had now. But that cocaine is actually a very, very good botanically based drug. Now, obviously, powdered cocaine that's stepped on and mixed and everything, and the addiction potential of taking concentrated cocaine, I mean, that's not good. So I'm not going to say that. But if you've noticed,
that's like taking a concentrate of cannabis versus a concentrate of that, or like the flower form. Like, they're very different in a lot of ways. One thing, actually, just to kind of like add to that, is Coca-Cola actually has a patent on steam distillation of cocoa leaves for the terpenes or essential oils off of that they then mixed into Coca-Cola, which they then took the recipe away. I'm sure you remember back in the day when they changed the recipe for a couple months and everyone flipped the frick out. And then all of a sudden they changed it back, but they added high fructose corn syrup in. When they changed it back, they still added those cocaine terpenes back into it. They actually have a Coca-Cola, the company, actually is the only one in the entire United States that has the ability to import cocaine, the coca plant, and then extract it, steam distill off all the terpenes, and then they sell all the numbing agents to a lot of those other drugs that, like you said, there are a lot of beneficial, which is why it's a Schedule II drug, not a Schedule I drug, because there are recognized medical benefits from it. And it's a very strong numbing agent. If I'm not mistaken, like Novocaine and things like that are all derivatives of it.
Right. When a lot of times when you're looking at pharmacology, drugs that sound the same are typically in the same class. So it's like, yes, Novocaine, like you said, all of these derive from, typically a similar base substance. And then they always have like a name that kind of goes like all the benzodiazepines have the same sort of, diazepam, temazepam, alprazolam. They all have that similar sound to them. So yes, but but cocaine's a good drug, but you don't see, I mean, it's probably not, they haven't done nearly with it what they could. I mean, there's probably a lot of other things it could be used for. I mean, think about it. We have, you have lidocaine, which it's a numbing agent. It's good. It's not that great. If you could have, cocaine numbing agents in a transdermal patch, that probably. But do you see it? No. Why? Who knows why? They know why. They know why they're not doing it. But that's what happens when Big Pharma gets it. They'll decide this is what they want it to be. If that's how they're going to maximize profit, and then that's the end of it.
Oh, he's over here getting closer and closer. He's been hiding in the background this whole time.
Hey, that's all right. Look, my dog would never let me go this long. The only reason I could do this is because I'm at work today.
Again, I super appreciate you coming on and spending so much time with me and all of us, just trying to educate people to know what's really going on here. As we had said before, this is the comment period. What do you think someone should say during that comment period that you really think that they would listen to, aside from like, again, like the old school stuff, like saying that it's dangerous and this, that, and the other. Like if we say like, yo, you guys are going to completely eradicate the industry and prop up the black market,
I
like,
think
is that something?
you have to talk. I hate to say this because it seems to be pandering, but I'm giving you advice as a politician that I know will work. So please don't take this in an offensive fashion. But
Yep.
I would talk about the recriminalization and oppression of minority communities.
Mhm.
That's a topic no politician wants to touch. If you're making a lot of those cases, if you're talking about destruction of our inner city communities because of the reemergence of black markets, if you're talking about endangering the health of vulnerable populations of color because of black market product that has no sort of controls, nobody knows what's in it. If you're talking about the recriminalization of minority youth, these are buzzwords that back politicians off. So again, the caveat, I'm not saying this because I believe it. I'm not saying it because, I'm pandering or trying to put anybody down in any way. It's not, I'm telling you what will be effective comments. So those are comments nobody touch. We want to talk about how the destruction of entrepreneurship in those that have been given access beyond the legacy markets. So we've worked so hard to not only decriminalize, but to help those who were victims of criminalization enter the legitimate market. And now here we are going to be putting something in place that will then again take them out of the market, destroy their ability to do business, and put them back where they were to begin with, which is back in the black market again. I think we want to look at the loss of state autonomy, because what works in Ohio doesn't work in Jersey or Florida, and I don't know that California will work anywhere. So that's not what our country is about. Every state's supposed to be a lab so we find the best ideas, and we haven't gotten to that point yet. Not all states have it even legalized. Okay, not all states have it legalized. So by taking it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, now you're imposing normalization on states that haven't followed the other 35. So these are the sorts of comments that are productive. Don't say prescription only. They don't care. Don't talk about federal control. They don't get. Those are not going to move the needle. They want to hear.
They're going to look at that and kind of roll their eyes and go, "I don't even want to hear this," and brush it aside.
They already know. They already know all that stuff. They know that you're not going to like it. They don't care that you're not going to like it. So don't make comments that aren't going to matter. I'd hate to say it, and it may turn everybody's stomach. Join in with those that say the normalization of it. Even if you agree that it should be normalized, lend your voice to those who say we don't want it normalized. Just understand within yourself their reasons for normalization, and their definition is different than yours, but our goal is the same. We don't want it normalized because we don't want to lose control and be subjugated by the federal government. They don't want it normalized because they're trying to deny access. It doesn't matter that it's different. What matters is the volume of comments that are the same, that make them look at this and say, wait a minute, got 1 million people here. I don't know. This isn't as popular as we thought it was. But we want to stay. You have to keep it in those political speak ideas. Okay. And again, I apologize if it sounds like political pandering or stereotyping. That's not my goal in this. I'm just trying to tell you what I know is effective and what backs politicians off and what makes them listen. That's what you have to say. And guess what? A lot of those negative results, that's going to happen, and we're going to wind up where we were back in the 80s and 90s and the bad old days again. So we don't want to drive a thriving industry that's creating ladders out of poverty and returning it back to a black market where all it does is breed criminality, where being a criminal is your only way out of poverty. We have to say we're making progress, and to do that is going to be, it's going to have a disparate impact on our minority communities, because those are the ones that are rising as our industry rises. Those messages work. Those messages matter. That's my recommendation. Replay this and listen to the ones I've said. Think of the ones that you're most comfortable with. Use those. If you use these, those are effective comments. Anything else, forget about it. They're not going to listen. They want to control. They don't care that you care about control. They care about antagonizing potentially vocal groups. So you don't want to, that's where you've got to get them sort of heading in their heads. And they'll say, oh, wait a minute, this isn't worth it. You got to get them to that point. It's not worth it. It's not moving the poll numbers in the right direction for the administration that wants to see it. These are the things that you want.
And unfortunately, you know as well as anyone having a career.
That's all this is about. They think they can buy us by pretending.
Yes.
These are the two most anti-cannabis individuals in office today in the most powerful spots. They didn't suddenly have a revelation and now they've had their moment and they're different. No, they're exactly who they are. They're exactly who they are. Don't forget that. They do whatever's politically expedient. When Kamala wanted to be a rising politician, she was arresting every minority member of California that had the smallest amount of marijuana because she wanted to be law and order Kamala. She didn't care. They've got no principle. And he's the same way. He's worse than she. So
he literally wrote the crime bill.
They're liars. They're liars. Don't forget who they've been their entire life. You don't just change like that. And they had plenty of time to do it before now. The timing is everything.
Yep.
Take it from a recovering politician. I know these things.
Yeah. And again, which is why, again, you come from such a very unique thing. And I feel like every single one of us should really be hearing, replaying every single thing that you said here today, because it's all been very effective. It's all been very true. It's all been very much so from your heart. You know, as a politician or previous politician, that, again, you don't have to be sounding any of these alarms. You know, as a businessman, you could very much so just be quiet and kind of like do your own little thing, and you'd be making all kinds of money doing it. You probably make more money than a majority of the people within the industry because of the fact of, you know, the knowledge that you do and how the game works on both sides. But instead, you're over here trying to really move the needle forward in the correct direction. And for that, I absolutely respect you and commend you so much for coming on, not only here today, not only just on the Adam Dunn show where you did a whole hour over there, but just speaking out from the beginning all the way, talking on LinkedIn when you were making these posts that I originally seen you on Beard Bros Pharma. They had taken your LinkedIn post and shared that, and that went pretty viral within the industry. So again, I really, really, really appreciate you speaking out the way that you have, because it's you don't have to do that. Like, no one else is really out there really speaking out about it on the level that you are, and definitely not in a position to where you are, to where you can really speak from all angles and be able to be well informed the way that you are. So again, I really, really, really appreciate you today.
Thanks. I love this industry. I love what we're doing. I understand that we all want it to be better. I understand we all want cannabis to be widely embraced by everybody, but that has consequences. And sometimes it's like we feel as an industry, we're at the 5-yard line. Why don't we run it across the goal? Because when you run it across the goal line, it's going to trigger changes. And it's going to forever change the way everything else goes. Sometimes it's better just to stop.
I feel like we just don't even know what the goal line is. I feel like we're racing at the goal line with the expectation that that's going to be it. And we're all just ready for this 20-year war to be done with. But in all reality, it's just a pseudo goal line. It's one of those things where they're waiting waving a carrot in front of our face, and they're like, yo, it's right here. But in all reality, it's very much so the opposite direction of where the carrot's at. So it's kind of like, again, like if people don't show where the deception is, if we don't have this educated conversation and this all of this, how are any of the public going to know to be able to try and move the needle into the right direction or finally race towards that goalpost? Because if we're seeing a goalpost that we think is the end of the road, but we don't realize the end of the road's not where we want to be, how are we going to avoid it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I said on the Adam Dunn show back when I was a kid, when Ronald Reagan said, the scariest words you ever hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. You know what?
Yep.
They haven't done a goddamn thing for us in 30 years. We don't
Nope.
need them. We can get the changes that we want through a patient process. We're trying to grab at something instead of letting it come to us. And that's the mistake that we're making. And nobody understands that by grabbing, you may tilt yourself over and fall right over the cliff.
Yep.
We're doing great. We're doing great.
Yeah.
Let's just continue to take this at the reasonable pace, and let's be informed. And that's what this is all about. My mother thinks I'm crazy. She's like, you need to shut up with that stuff. You're going to wind up like one of those Boeing whistleblowers. And
Yeah,
I'm like,
seriously.
I said, I would love to think I'm that important, but I doubt it. But, I said, what I'm saying is nothing that's crazy. It's just people don't have their eyes open to what's right in front of them. And I'm trying to help people see. You're seeing what you want to see. You're not seeing what is. And I'm just trying to help people see what is, because what they think it is not what it is. It's what I'm telling you it is. That's what it is. It's what it is. So
it's time for us to all just kind of take the blinders off and come to the realization that, oh, wait, they're deceiving us. They're not here on our side fighting with us this good fight. They're the guys that we've been fighting against this whole time.
Right. The minute that all of a sudden the minute that all of a sudden they decide, and then they can just change right back again. I mean, we never needed them. We don't need them now. There's no reason to let them get any more involved than they are. Continue to the Safe Banking Act. Absolutely. Continue to advocate for these. But do not put them in control of it by allowing them to reschedule it and turn it into a controlled by the DEA, FDA, and federal government. People, controlled substance. It's in the name.
Yeah. It doesn't get any more simple than that. It's, let's not give them the control. Let's take the power back, not give it to them.
We've got it. Every state, we can affect our state legislatures and get them to give what we want. Okay, yeah. Let's just take that win for now and see. And maybe in a few years we revisit doing a federal thing or whatever. But you're going to control, your industry will control the narrative and how Ohio grows and changes and continues to evolve like we do in Jersey. That's the thing. It's so much easier at the state level. Once you get into the federal level, it's so hard because you got 50 different states. You know how hard it is to get you got to get majorities on both sides to agree with something. And then you got to hope nobody sues. And then you got to hope the president signs it. We've got it as good as we're going to get it for now. Just understand that this is fool's gold. And, we're putting the gun, I say this, we're putting the gun to our own heads and pulling the trigger. They don't even have to do it. That's how ridiculous this has gotten.
Yep, without realizing it. Yeah, and that's because they've conned us into believing that the gun's a magical way to heaven or something like that without actually describing what happens when you get along the way. You pull that trigger and then it's like, oh, I can't unpull it.
Yep. That's why I say I'm here from the dystopian future to warn you. I'm trying to stop you so you don't wind up where I already have been. And that's all this. I've been there. You don't want it. You don't want it. Pharmacy used to be like cannabis dispensaries, and now it's ruined. And you don't want it. And mark my words, they will ruin it. They will ruin it fast.
Yeah. All right. I feel like we've ran quite a while. I feel like I've taken up quite a bit of your time. I appreciate you very much. Is there anything else you wanted to say to everyone else before we close out?
No, that's it. Again, just thank you so much. People, please listen to this. Listen to it a few times. If you have specific questions that you think, here's the one that he doesn't know how to answer, send it to me. I know how to answer it.
Yeah.
And I've been through it all. So yes, I will talk to anybody. If I get lots of messages, I respond to all of them as quickly as possible. You can get me through LinkedIn. I could tell you that my LinkedIn profile probably quadrupled in a couple short weeks. So,
Yeah.
Anthony Minnitti, Anthony V Minnitti at LinkedIn or whatever, just, message me there. You can get me through CamdenApothecary.com if you want to see a little bit about what it is that we do here and, what the dispensary looks like. But, I love this profession. I love what we've done. I love everybody in it. And I embrace the opportunity to share whatever knowledge I may have that could be helpful. So feel free to contact me. I'm here for you.
Awesome. And with that, we're going to close out. Again, I super appreciate you. Again, shameless plug or not shameless plug. Shout out to the Camden Apothecary. If you're ever in New Jersey, go ahead and give a stop into them. Right next door to a pharmacy. I mean, how much better can you get? All right, guys. I hope you enjoy everything, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Rodney Hash podcast.
Thank you.
Stop.